We are live. That's funny. I got the notification from the Twitter stream on my phone before I got the notification in my own software that we were live. But we are indeed live. Twitter/X, Facebook, and YouTube. So I will wait. We have viewers on only one of those so far. So we'll wait for comments to come in. But we have Elle with us today. Doreen is representing Facebook from Florida. So we have comments coming in from Facebook. Nobody on YouTube yet. More Facebook, more Twitter. Anyway, we do these monthly-ish Q&A live streams. We get so many questions. So many questions. Doreen's trying to sneak one in. When are you going to do beginner Hebrew lessons again? Maybe we'll get to that. Don't answer that yet. But we do these because we get questions from all sorts of places. People sending questions over social media. People sending questions with our contact form on behemothDiscipleship.com. That's kind of the primary spot. But we take those and we're able to filter those out to the appropriate people. Some of those we have FAQ videos for, and we're like, oh, we've gotten that question 100 times before. Here's your answer. People are like, love it. But then some of them are, we just get the questions so often, or the topic is so nuanced, or whatever it is. And so we want to talk about them on these Q&As. Some of the questions are questions that we've never seen before, but they're really intriguing and interesting. And we dig in a little bit and we're like, oh, there's something here. So we want to talk about those, and mostly we just want to model what it is to wrestle through these questions together, because we're not really giving a whole lot of definitive answers, but we're here to talk about it, to wrestle through it and see what happens. So Elle is joining us, one of our illustrious hosts of the podcast, originally appearing in session 6, now appearing twice so far in session 1. I will be publishing episode 12 tomorrow. You've appeared in episodes 4 and 8 so far. More to come, of course. But the session 1 reboot is ongoing. Everything's happening. So much happening. Let's start by pointing out that our next Q&A is Monday, April 28th. So we're about a month out from the next one. And we're not going to be able to get to every question we have today, but we have been selecting a handful of questions that seem like Elle would be great to answer them over the last... When was the last time you were on, Elle? It's
Probably
like a year ago?
Seems right.
Close to a year. So some questions are just like, well, it's up. It's the monthly Q&A, so we're giving them to whoever's there. And then some of these we've set aside. So they're older questions or whatever. I don't even like these. Some of these first questions are from before you were last on here, so I don't even understand what happened. But I'm gonna invoke special privileges, and I'm gonna ask the very first question. Question 0. You didn't know about this. I didn't even know about this. But I was looking at my Parsha reading that I'm doing tonight. It's the last one of Exodus, the Pekude, Parshat Pekude. However you say that.
Nailed it.
There is, and you're familiar with the Gulder scheme of pairing up portions of Luke with the different Parsha readings. There is no Luke portion associated with this portion of Exodus. There's no skipped portion of Luke. Like last week's Parsha Luke reading pairs up with next week's Parsha Luke reading, and there's just no text that's associated with this. So why would Luke and or Gulder, because we don't actually know for sure that this is what Luke was doing, but why would there be a skipped portion of Luke for this Parsha of Exodus?
While I don't have a direct line either to Luke or Gulder, I do have a theory for you. And
you're a big Exodus fan. Done a lot of work in Exodus.
I am a big Exodus fan. It's not related to that, though. It's related to the lunar calendar. The lunar calendar gets off a lot from the solar calendar as we would think of it. And so when calculating things like holiday dates and presumably Parsha readings as well, sometimes there's delays and it just doesn't line up quite right because of the way our planet spins. So without looking at it, without knowing anything about Gulder's chart, etc., I would guess that maybe something is skipped because of the way that they've segmented them out. But I don't know.
Mm,
I'd have to
okay. All right.
love
Well,
starting
that's
out. Total hot take, blind read, no idea what you're about to ask me. It's
I mean,
good.
that's what I do basically every Sunday night. So
Getting your
we
feet
have
wet.
comments coming in from Facebook. We have comments from YouTube. So it seems like all the platforms are represented. We are successfully streaming. So I am done stalling. I will turn it over to you, Elle, to get into our real questions from real people.
Okay. All right. Well, you'll have to put other. You're a real person, Brent. That's
I'm a
okay.
real person, but you know,
Wouldn't that be a reveal if you were not? You've been an android the whole time. No, would not
Data
be.
is my favorite Star Trek character. So,
This is also one of mine.
hmm hmm
We share that deep appreciation for
Perfect.
androids. Okay, great. The first question that I have on my document is from Olivia, and she has a question regarding circumcision. Olivia asks, considering circumcision is only possible for males, how are women included in the covenant promise? I love starting out strong by being given the circumcision question to kick things off. But it's very good. It's very important. How could it be that if this covenant promise is so important for Abraham and defines who we are as God's people or Jesus followers, according to Paul, how could it be? Oh, look at that. We've got a little thing. Thank you. Presumably, Brent. How could it be that women aren't a part of that, that they're not included in that? It's always a good check to take a step back and to notice our own biases and the things that we're bringing to the table. And it's not that it's bad to ask questions about, like, where's the inclusion? Where are women? I don't understand. But it can be helpful to remember when coming to the text that those weren't the immediate questions that would have been on the edge of mind for the people who were experiencing the narratives in the Bible or the first listeners of the Bible. So, with that in mind, the culture, right? We've talked about this in a lot of other places. It's going to be patrilocal, patrilineal. It's not going to be individual, it's going to be corporate. And so, in this biblical societal framework in the Bronze Age and Iron Age, the way you think about household and who you are and identity and to what deity you belong is not an individual thing. It's not that in your household, I follow Hera, but my sister follows Artemis, right? It's our household has one household deity, and that's been picked by our ancestors, and something that we all come under um, that household path that's been carved out by people who came before us. So we see this in Tanakh, but we also see this in the New Testament when we have folks get saved in the book of Acts. And it says not only they, but their whole household gets baptized when they get baptized. Which isn't to say that there wasn't like evangelism going on in the household when the head of the house came home, that they wouldn't necessarily talk to all their servants and tell them the gospel or whatever. But it's not included because it's a different culture. It's a corporate culture. It's a household culture. And so the male in their culture was the head of the house most of the time. And so it's for them that it's really important to have circumcision be the sign, the token, the sigil, the pledge, right? We see Yehuda gives his stuff to Tamar. One of the words for the stuff that he gives to Tamar in Genesis is his ut, which is the word that circumcision, that talks about circumcision. It's an ut. So there's only one person who gets that. And if you want to say, well, but it's not just the patriarch El, it's the whole family, the boys all the way down. Yes, it's because the boys all the way down are either carrying on the the mishpacha, the family legacy, right? Or they're going and starting new ones, versus the women, again, in their society, which isn't like necessarily prescriptive, but the women are joining other people's societies, not societies, excuse me, households. Okay, I'm just looking over here. Is there anything else I want to talk about? Oh, yes. Circumcision, also from the very beginning, isn't just the physical, embodied picture of what God wants for his people. It's always been metaphorical. So we tend to think of circumcision of the heart being something that shows up in the New Testament, but it shows up multiple times in Deuteronomy. So very early on in the span of Tanakh, you already have, showing up in Deuteronomy, later in the prophets as well, Jeremiah especially, you have spots where the speaker is saying, hey, what's really important here? Circumcision of the heart, not just physical circumcision. And of course, that applies to all peoples, not anyone with a heart. Anyone with a heart is included in circumcision in that way. Why? Well, that's a whole other delightful topic about priestly access and Egypt, and what it meant to them. But that's not really in your question. So I won't necessarily pull out my soapbox to go to town on what my favorite theories around circumcision are. I have inserted a live question from Brent that I've never read before. The question is actually from Michaela, so I have to decide. Oh, sure. Okay, so Michaela asks or points out, rightly, that Elijah, runs to Be'er Sheva. He sits under a tree, and Adonai meets him there. Similarly, Hagar runs to Be'er Sheva. She puts Yishmael under a bush, and God meets her there. Is there a hyperlink? Is there something going on? I think that there's something going on for sure. Absolutely. I think there's something going on in a poetic way as well as a literary way, and then fun remez way. I love all of those. But if we remember, Isaiah talks about the way that we experience God, right? That he is, and we thus are to be like a rock in the desert. I need Marty to suddenly show up and quit the whole thing perfectly, but the big rock in the desert, the tree that provides shade. And so there's something in the story that makes sense. Both those people are running. They've both had bad days. Eliyahu is being chased by Yizabel for what he's been up to. And Hagar has been kicked out of her household once again with her son. So they both had a hard time. Where are you going to stop? Well, you're probably not going to stop in the middle of the wadi where the sun's beating down your head. You're going to find a tree. So narratively, that makes sense. Poetically, it makes sense to me about where you encounter God. Eliyahu, while he's under the tree, right, an angel shows up and gives him, tells him to eat and drink, which is always good. Pastoral care, good advice. If you've been having a hard day, don't forget to take a nap. You need to eat and drink. But are we supposed to think about Hagar when we notice the Be'er Sheva connection in the tree connection between Eliyahu and Hagar? I think that's possible. I think it's exciting. I think it merits more thinking about. Eliyahu is partially making, you're listening to me think out loud, by the way, so who knows what I'm about to say. But Eliyahu, part of his big argument is that the people have forsaken their calling, their identity, who they're supposed to be in the world, how they're supposed to show up in the world. And Hagar, of course, is the mother of Yishmael, who is also not right and dead center in what they're supposed to be doing. In terms of, I'm so distracted by the news thing happening here. I'm going to try not to see it. Yishmael is not dead center, right? Yitzchak is the chosen one. And so maybe we're supposed to think about that. Is Eliyahu missing it? when he's been the one telling Yisrael that they've been messing it and he's also messing it. Maybe. I think that's really fun to play about with, and everybody should enjoy doing that on their own. Okay, great. Brent hasn't messed with my questions. Or maybe he has, but it's further down. Next question that I have is from Amanda. And she says, I would love for you guys to do an episode on dreams and visions. We do have an episode on dreams and visions. Amanda, if you get to it in last season 8, Talmudic Matthew, there's a section on visions and dreams when it's talking about Yosef and the Christmas story. They're all Christian stories. The Christmas story. But she goes on to say, I am someone who has had dreams and visions for many years. I was fearful of sharing this with most of my Christian friends because it makes me weird, which is in quotes, and is likened to witchcraft in many churches. I recently had a very disturbing dream. She goes on to share about her experience there, and then brings it back to, since there are many instances of dreams and visions in the text, is there any specific lesson taught around this subject in the Jewish community? I would love to hear this discussed on the podcast so weirdos like me can turn toward Jesus with this gift. So if you want to hear specifically Jewish teachings on dreams and visions, you can find them in episode 393 of the Bema podcast. We crack open that part of the book and get into it and have a good time. I'm sorry, Amanda, that you felt isolated in your experience and trying to figure out what your experience is. And that hasn't been overall positive current in your spiritual walk and following Jesus, relationship with God. You are totally correct that it is normal, both in the text and in Jewish comment, that dreams and visions are just something that happens. We see it the whole time, all the way from Genesis. So Avimelech has a dream, I think, for the first time. He's the first person to have a dream, but you can argue about who had the first vision based on how you translate some things in Genesis. And then all the way to the end, right? The whole book of Revelation is John's vision. So it does show up all the time in the text. Why doesn't it show up all the time in the church? Well, there's kind of two ways of thinking about supernatural things that we see happening in the text, or the ways that the Holy Spirit shows up and talks to people, including dreams and visions and not. And one of those approaches is to say, God is still speaking all of the time and speaks to people in all the ways that he did in the Bible. And that is normative and part of the Christian experience. And you can hang out in communities where that is absolutely the case. And people will say, oh my gosh, God told me this last night in a dream. And nobody will shoot a blow dart at you and try to get you out of the sanctuary. The other side of that conversation in Christian tradition says that the Bible is the complete revelation of God, and so that the Holy Spirit does not usually use dreams and visions anymore to communicate. So if you run into folks who do make you feel, quote, weird, they're coming from a different Christian tradition. They're using passages like in Corinthians, where Paul says, but when the perfect comes, all these things will cease. And then he lists a whole bunch of things. Dreams and visions aren't on that list. That usually still characterizes those two communities. The charismatic community is the first, and then the cessationist community is the second. So that's what's going on if you've encountered different folks in different church contexts. What do I want to say about that? I want to say that I hope that you find a community which helps you to grow in following Jesus in this way that you've been having these spiritual experiences. Hope that for everybody, right? That everyone would have a place where they feel belonging and feel like they can grow and mature in their walk with Christ, right? That's always the goal. But if you do want to hear more specifically, like Amanda asked for, Jewish community ideas about dreams and visions, you can find that in episode 393. Okay, what does Adam say? Adam has a question for me specifically. It says that. Not all of these say that. Adam was looking at BLB and noticed that give thanks said yada, and yada happened to sound like the same word for to know. Adam says, you mentioned that there is a connection between Hebrew word trees. So is there a specific connection between giving thanks, being beloved, and intimate knowledge of? I like where your head is at, Adam. I love that you noticed this. Fantastic. Here is what is leading you astray. What is leading you astray is the limited phonemes that we have in the English language. So in English, we just have the ah sound, and we have short versions and long versions. But in Hebrew, we have multiple characters that can make an ah sound. Unlimited one, really, but two that are causing you to trip up. And one is the aleph, and the other is the ayin. So in give thanks, in words connected to that particular word, the root is hands. Root is hands. And so the word for giving thanks and the word for confession, and sometimes translated the word for praise, though I would argue about the accuracy of that particular translation, they're all linked to the idea of throwing your hands up. You are sending something up to God. If you look around, they'll be like shoot or hurl. It's you are down here and God is in some higher plane is the idea, is the picture. And so when we are confessing something or giving things to something, we are sending it up. Yada is spelled with an ayin, so it gets that little guttural sound at the end. Yada versus yada. Totally get where you're coming from. If you're not listening for it, or the person saying the word isn't pronouncing the ayin, how are you supposed to know? So yada is a different word because it is spelled with a different letter than the other form. So I love that you're thinking about connections. I'm sure you could do a mystical thing about giving thanks and intimate knowledge of, right? There's plenty there to work with. And they do sound similar. And if you read enough rabbinic material, you know they don't even need that much to get on a train about things being linked, right? They could be like, the word is in the wrong order, but if we like put the this over here and the this over there and this over here, they are the same. So if you want to build something off of that idea, Adam, then you should. But do know that they're different words. Okay. Alex says, I have a question about the titles Son of God and Son of Man. In Genesis 6, I've heard a lot of people say that the sons of God were angels that mated with human women who were daughters of man. In Job, we see Hashatan, Satan, come before God and before the sons of God, parentheses, presumably angels. This is still Alex speaking. But then after Daniel, it seems to switch, where son of man means heavenly being, and son of God means human who follows God. I get how either means human or heavenly being on its own and how they got there in their time, but I don't understand how and why they switched meanings. I get where you're coming from, Alex. It feels like a lot of titles and a lot of interpretive jumps. So let's talk about it. The story that you're talking about, bring up, is in Genesis 6, and we can look at it. It's probably a good idea for me to look at it while I'm talking about it, so I don't say something askew. So it's already verses 1 and 2. Immediately, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were fair, and they took to wife such as them as they chose. And then if we jump down to verse 4, it says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and bore children to them. These were mighty men that were of old, the men of renown. That's not my translation. That is the RSV, if you're curious. So there is a lot of debate and difference, which is okay and perfectly fine, about what everything means and to which camps all the people who appear in this section, which camps they belong to. Right? Some of those people say sons of God are just righteous people, and some of them don't say that. So the thing that they're angels, like you said in parentheses. So, what I would draw your attention to is if you look at it in the Hebrew, or you have an Hebrew interlinear in front of you, or you know somebody who speaks Hebrew, you can ask them. And it says this, it doesn't say sons of God, bum, bum, bum. It says b'nai, which just means sons. And then it has ha Elohim. And ha Elohim, that ha at the beginning, is the definite article. It's the word the. And so when we start peeling back these concepts of why does that make a difference, El? It just says sons of the God instead of sons of God. How does this illuminate anything? Well, it's actually very significant because the word Elohim, and now here I'm in my own car, I'm driving my own car, which I bring up because there's probably a diversity of views in the Benoit teaching team about this particular term or about how to take it. Maybe the other guys don't care. I have no idea what they think, but I do want to make clear that this is me here and my opinion, which is informed, but not speaking for everybody. I'm speaking for Elgar Refrix. Elohim seems to be a title that's not just for God, that it's a category that describes supernatural beings. And so God is one of the names for God, certainly is Elohim, and he shows up all the time. But God doesn't show up with a ha in front of him, because if you're like, that's my mom, right? You just say mom. You don't say that's the mom. But if there's a group of moms at a party and you're like, where are the moms? Oh, the moms are in the kitchen. Then you do put the in front. Wow, that's very. They're in the kitchen having a private conversation. They're not doing work in there. That's funny. Okay, don't get distracted. So when we have the in front of it, it's usually a tip off that it's not just talking about God, Adonai, the Lord, the one whom we follow, who created the heavens and the earth. It's often used when they're talking about idols or other gods, different ways that things, these words show up in Tanakh. And sometimes your English translation steals that from you and the ability to tell the difference. So B'nai Ha Elohim, sons of the gods, and Elohim is actually plural, so there's that to mess with too. So who are they? Sons of supernatural beings of some kind, not necessarily God. So that means that when way down in the story, when we get to like Romans 8, and it's talking about how we have been adopted by God and therefore we're children of God, it's different because it's not ha Elohim. If you were saying all the things that Paulos is saying in Greek, if you were to say them in Hebrew, it wouldn't be ha Elohim. It would be we are Yeldeh, we are children, and then just Elohim. No ha part of it. No definite article. You bring up Daniel, and Alex says, after Daniel, it seems to switch where son of man means heavenly being and son of God means human who follows God. Does son of man mean heavenly being? Again, this is El's particular opinion, but if you were to say the word son of man in Hebrew, which Daniel's written in Hebrew and Aramaic, which if you have an untrained eye, look pretty much exactly identical. You would spell that Ben Adam. It doesn't say Ben Ish, it says Ben Adam. So Adam means human. And so that's where we get into like, oh, maybe this is talking about Jesus's humanity. We kind of import our Christology into the book of Daniel, though I certainly do believe that Daniel is not Daniel. Daniel's a human too, but Jesus is a human. That's not what I'm arguing about. But when this phrase Ben Adam shows up in the book of Daniel, it's my opinion and that of others as well. I'm not all on my own here. That Adam there isn't just the word for human, but is the name of the character that shows up in Genesis. So who are the sons of Adam, other than just humans, a la C.S. Lewis and Narnia. The son of Adam, there's three that come to mind, right? We've got Cain and Abel and Seth. And so there is this idea, there is this teaching, this encoded way of talking about justice when you're living under oppression, that the son of Adam, specifically Abel, was going to come back because Abel is the first person to be murdered in human history, right? So he's the first person who experienced injustice. He hadn't actually done anything against Cain, and Cain just showed up with all of Cain's issues and took it out on his brother. And so the idea is that the way that under Persian oppression they were talking about that story is Abel's coming back. And that was a little wink nudge to be like, the first murdered guy is going to take vengeance on the Cains of the world, right? Because they were being oppressed. And so you have this issue of how long will this oppression go on? Is this who we really are? And so in the book of Daniel, then, yes, it is still Jesus. I would still say it's Jesus. And I think Jesus plays with this idea plenty that, yeah, Abel's coming back. The first guy to get murdered is coming back. And Jesus's big surprise is, and he's going to get murdered again. But at the same time, of course, he's breaking down the gates of hell and doing all the incredible things that Jesus did through his death. So I would argue that the term Son of Man isn't really talking about Jesus's humanity, though he was. It's talking about his role as an oppressed, persecuted person, Abel returned, who's going to break this cycle of injustice and oppression by being put to death himself. So that's what's going on, in my opinion. There's also Genesis 6, the Nephilim. Those are different than the sons of God. Sometimes those get together. I read that, I think, in verse 3. Nephil just means fall. So it seems like somebody who fell. That's the main takeaway. People who fell from heaven, maybe. A different kind of fall, maybe. We have an addendum from Marty that was put in here. From Martin Solomon himself. His name isn't actually Marty, but he says, I believe the late Dr. Heiser, which, yes, his book is lying around somewhere in this room. Dr. Heiser took a similar approaches to the sons of the gods and its connection to the divine council. Marty is no expert, but this seems to be a good take and consistent with Jewish conversation in Marty's mind, at least as far as he understands. So that's half the Bema team. I still have questions about what I really think, but I think I'm facing in very similar directions as Elle. Thanks, Marty. Love that. Love that. I have been enjoying the Heiser book that I've been told to read by just too many people. So I finally cracked it open, and what a good time. What a good time it's been. I love being in Congress with other thinkers. It's always good not to be out on the plank by yourself over the seas. All right, we have another question from Karen. Karen says, for Q&A, as in Q&A, it's pretty good, Karen. I love it. Karen asks, could you discuss Isaiah 19:25 quote from the ESV, whom the Lord of hosts has blessed, saying, blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance. Karen says the meaning of Israel is obvious to understand here. Excellent. Egypt, I might be able to, ... But Assyria, I thought Assyria was always referred to as a cursed region. That's a great question. So again, I'm going to try to hold to my policy here of actually reading from the text when I'm talking about it so that I'm not putting my foot in my mouth. Okay, Isaiah 19, let's start verse 23. We've got, in that day, there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria, and the Assyrian will come into Egypt, and the Egyptian into Assyria, and the Egyptians will worship with the Assyrians. And that day, Israel will be the third with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing. in the midst of the earth, whom the Lord of hosts has blessed, saying, Blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my heritage. That's the RSV again. Okay, so Assyria shows up in the very beginning of Tanakh. If you've missed it, Ashur is its name in Hebrew, and it's way back in Genesis 2 in the narrative about the rivers. Might be the plains of Shinar, and the king, Nimrod, founds Ashur. So there is a through line in the Tanakh about Assyria. And it's beautiful. It certainly points to the work of Jesus, that in the beginning of that story in Genesis, right, we've got this great, powerful, mighty hunter, and he founds these great, scary cities, and one of them is Assyria. And then Isaiah here points us to the idea that these enemies are not enemies forever and are not just dualism, black and white, as much as we sometimes have convenient to say, well, these people are going this way and these people are going this way. Isaiah plays with this group who actively is persecuting God's people and said, did you know they're actually part of God's mission too? Actually part of what God's doing in the world. He's putting the world back together. And that includes Assyria. How offensive for the people of the time. We can miss that with our lullaby effect, but it should still strike us as beautiful, even if we're not actively being oppressed by the Assyrians in the way that the original listeners of Isaiah would have been. But then certainly, of course, once we get up to Jesus, when he appears on the scene, he's all about the offensive nature of the gospel, is that it's good news and freedom and service and healing, not just for his people, but he's healing the centurion's daughter, and he's ministering to Romans just as he's ministering to his portion, which should just be Israel. So pointing out that there isn't a particular place that God says, not that one, straight to hell immediately, but that he has his mind open and saying, yes, these people are once hostile. Quoting Ephesians there, people who are hostile to me, that's not the end of the story. God always has another end. So there's that. As for the cursed region part, I know of some places or stories that come to mind where a place is literally seemingly cursed. Jericho is one of them, I believe. Gehinnom is also another one. I'm not super aware of Assyria being on that list. That doesn't come to mind for me. Sometimes Christian tradition builds its own midrash, so to speak, about different areas, especially when current events are going on. Sometimes those things pop up more. So maybe that's where that teaching came from that you're thinking of, but I could also be missing something. It happens all the time. So I apologize if I've missed something. Karen, your name means horn, by the way. Great name. Okay. Ethan asks, I've recently tried to rediscover God, and I'm reading the Bible, but I'm not understanding it. Mostly the relationship between just kidding, El space, and Yahweh. So one of the words for God and Yahweh, Adonai. This is because I've read online that they are different. And Yod He Vav He is the son of El. So a different name for God there in a Canaanite religion. Is this true? This is really confusing and challenging to my faith. I'm sorry, Ethan, that this has been confusing and challenging. I understand it would be confusing and challenging to me as well if I just ran across that fact from people saying it very assuredly and confidently. This is also the kind of thing that makes me want to throw myself onto a pyre and immolate the whole academic world because of the way that these things come up and they're talked about and then they filter out into the rest of the world, and it's still just speculation of an evolution of terms. I presume this is Brent making these wonderful little news flashes. Who is God and why so many names? I'm certainly not going to answer that question, Brent. Let's open our whole systematic theology and then find all the names of God. I would encapsulate this question differently, but that's okay. So, how does this idea come about that El, not Elle, El is different from Adonai? Well, if anybody wants to look with me, they can find the main portion, the central portion, the essential one, where this topic comes up, or people make their case, and that's the book of Deuteronomy. It's chapter 32, verses 8 and 9. Deuteronomy, thank you. There we go. There we go, Brent. I appreciate that. Okay, Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9. If you're not Brent, by the way, I apologize. 8 and 9 says this from the RSV: when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of men, he fixed the bounds of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. Bum, 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 sons of God is already returned. It doesn't actually say sons of God here. It says the sons of Israel. So I don't know what the RSV is doing. And then verse 9 says, for the Lord's portion, that's the tetragrammaton, is his people, and Yaakov is his allotted heritage. All right, so if you're looking at that and you're confused, here's what's going on. It says a figure that is named El, almost, but it's not, it's Elyon, gave out, separated the nations for where they should go. And then the one that God gets, as in Adonai, our God, Yod He Vav He, he's the one who gets Israel. So the academic leap that is made here is that there is this God named Elyon, the Most High, and he is different, supersedes, is higher in authority and power structure and hierarchy than God, than the Lord, than Adonai. Because this God is the one who gave Adonai Yisrael. That's the leap that they make. What instantly occurs to hopefully just about everybody is the fact that there are lots of names and titles for God continually, as there are for deities all across the world, including and perhaps especially in the ancient Near East. If you read any account of like Baal doing anything, he's called like the gray-eyed one and the storm god and the consort of whoever, right? And they'll be in the same story. It's like boom, 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 boom. If you listen to anyone preach, right, they don't always just say the Lord the whole time. They'll be like, the Lord is our shepherd and we will not want, because God is enough for us. Jesus is sufficient. If you've never been to church before, I can imagine being like, oh, that's a lot of different deities. I'm so confused. The rest of us know that it's referring to the same being, but that there's different descriptive titles that come into play. So it's just very speculative, and it's always this verse. It's not just like this is the one that I know about. It's always this verse. If you go to the Society for Biblical Literature and you attend a talk on this particular topic about the evolution of the history of how Adonai came to be, and they'll always use this verse to talk about that. How do they get there? How do they get to this idea that they're different? If you have just a giant whiteboard and you're sitting in a room and you're like, well, there's all these titles, and some of them we have stories for how they came to be, right? Like El Roi, the God who sees, that shows up in the Hagar story that we talked about earlier, a question from Michaela. And so there's a name for that, but we have a reason for an etiology for why that is. But we don't we do for the tetragrammaton, because God says, this is what my name is, and tells Moshe what it means. But we don't have that for El. The other problem that comes into play is El just means God. And so when you look in Canaanite religion, And Canaanite language is closely related. It's another Semitic like evolution. So their word for God, you can say, oh ha, El shows up everywhere in Canaan. Sure, he does, because it's the name God. So yes, they're going to be talking about the word God all the time because they have gods. And so, but if you're an academic sitting in this room with a whiteboard trying to figure out, well, how did we get here and which came first? And you kind of sketching out like, well, we think this would be because of this, and we think this is because of this. And evolution is what the brain comes up with, right? And so then they find something in scripture that they use for that. I apologize if you're an academic and you feel that I'm not being fair to academics. If there's something that I've missed in the way that this theory came to be, I apologize, and I love to learn more. But I have run into it quite a lot and have done my own reading. It's been percolating around the edges of the mainstream Christian conversation for a while. And sometimes it gets brought up like, well, of course, didn't you know that this is the case? And it can be really destabilizing for people. And it's especially frustrating to me when it's introduced to people as if it's a black and white truth, when once again, it's purely speculative based on one or two particular verses from the text. Alas and alack. I hope that helps, Ethan, if you listen to this. Cassie asks if there's an episode regarding soul care. Soul care, light versus darkness, binding and casting out darkness, removing evil. Does Bema speak to that type of thing? I've listened to episode 255, and I'm wondering if there's more on the subject, such as removing generational ties, soul ties, and understanding what your godly identity is. Well, Cassie, welcome. I'm so glad you've been enjoying Bema. She said something nice at the top that I didn't read. So that's not me being passive aggressive. She said she loves Bema. I'm so glad. So there is a wonderful episode which features binding and loosing. I know it's in there because I remember learning it when I was a wee lass in Marty's literal classroom. And I'm sure Brent will throw in the document, if I talk slowly enough, which episode that is on the Jewish conversation around binding and loosing, which is very different than sometimes the way we run into it in other communities, which is fine. Again, ironically, right, the point with binding and loosing is that there's different communities who interpret things different ways. So if you're curious about that, feel free to go listen to episode 140, read the transcript, have a great time, learn about that, learn about the Jewish perspective. And when they said binding and loosing, what exactly did they mean? Yep. So that's episode 140. If you are thinking about, though, terms like light and darkness, casting out or binding darkness, removing evil, generational ties, soul ties, understanding your godly identity, that is a different kind of barrel of monkeys, which is out there and helpful. I put a little note to myself when I looked, when I was previewing this. I'm trying to figure out exactly. Oh, I know why I put that verse in. I'm like, what am I talking about? I figured it out, everyone. Never fear. So when talking about generational ties specifically, this kind of goes back to the different tradition and the different understandings. This tends to fall along the charismatic community lines versus the cessationist community lines. You won't usually hear any of these words in the cessationist community, but you will in the charismatic community. And once again, there is likely a diversity of opinions on all of these topics within the Bema teaching team, and I am merely speaking from my own experience, my own opinion. But talking specifically about generational ties here, sometimes you hear generational curses. So where's that idea coming from? Well, if you look at places such as, but not limited to, Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7, it It's a classic portion where God is talking about who he is, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, etc. At the end of that, it talks about he will by no means clear the guilty, but he visits the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. So if you're not familiar with these terms or these concepts, you've never heard of it before, maybe you're from a more cessationist community and it's all new to you. Some of these ideas and traditions in the church are built on texts like this that say, look, you could be experiencing something in your life now, and we as individualists think like, oh, everything that happens, if like God's controlling everything in my life around me, of course that only has to do with me individually. This particular community would say, well, it can also be from something that your ancestors did because of this third and fourth generation thing. Other places that it shows up in the text are like the books of Kings, where over and over God says that he's doing for this random king something positive, or not sometimes when we get to like Ahab, but positive because of his love for David. So the idea is he isn't just taking the great-great-grandson of David and treating him as he deserves, but he's treating him differently because of what his ancestor did. So if you're hanging out in a more charismatic community, they might ask you about generational ties and such because they're trying to help you find freedom from stuff that is might be way back there in your family line, because they care about the work of Christ being applied to you, not just individually, but for your family going in the future specifically. So that's where they're coming from. If you're totally confused, you've never heard any of these titles before, that's what's going on. Removing generational ties, then there's like the Peshat level too. If you're like, whoa, this seems all really mystical and way out there, woo woo for me. You're not alone. There's plenty of people who feel that way. There's also a very surface level way that it feels true, right? If you have like a family history of alcoholism, that's something that tends to go in families. Sometimes there's, you can find out if you've talked to people in your family line, find out like, oh, wow, there's really a history of domestic violence in my family, and I didn't realize that, right? And sometimes it does feel like those things go by family. So if you're like, oh, no, but I do understand this, the idea, again, is that if Christ said it is finished on the cross, then that means that those things are either already snapped off, right? And so there's another theological bifurcation. Choose your path. All of those things are already broken because the work of darkness has already been cut off by the death and resurrection of Jesus. Or there's some folks who would say it's accessible because of what Jesus has done, and yet we still need to pray into it. We still need to pursue it. We still need to pray about your family line. And often, again, that community uses the argument that like God gave the land to his people to grasp, to seize, to possess. And it was his gift to them, and yet they still had to go out and like rout out the people that were there, right? And so there's lots of different ways to talk about that, lots of different opinions, I'm sure, within the Bema teaching team. The last thing there in your list, Cassie, is godly identity. I think we had talked about godly identity on Bema. I feel pretty solid in saying being a question about who you are, your identity in God, firstly being conformed to the image of Jesus, but then something that is worked out in community and in the context of discipleship. Maybe there's there's so many different questionnaires and quizzes if you like doing discernment in that kind of way of being like, what are my spiritual gifts, or which of these archetypes could I be from the Bible, right? There's like the fivefold thing. Am I more of a teacher or a blah 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 or blah blah blah? There's so much ground that can be covered with so many exciting possibilities there, but it's certainly something that is exciting work, fun work. It's at least fun to me. And so I guess we haven't talked very much about that. I'm trying to think over 9 seasons. But I hope for you, Cassie, that you find a place where you can investigate your curiosities more and what your identity in Christ is as well. Specifically, there is an additional addendum that has been put here that I'm discovering what it says with everyone. It's a comment from Greg. Generational curse could be a direct move of God, or is it a generational effect caused from past family members' decisions or sins? Is that the proper understanding? That's a great theological thing. Remember, I talked about, so there's this camp, and then there's this camp, and then this camp bifurcates this way. So one of the things that you'll hear is like, again, on a science level, it's a generational effect. It's something that happens, right? If you've ever studied epigenetics, you know that something happening, trauma in your past, it literally changes your genome, and then that gets passed down to your children. So is that just a cause and effect thing, or is that God doing it specifically, right? Is God saying, because this happened to your parents, so it shall happen to you, right? That's, again, something that people play with about, is God doing it? Or is there really a difference because God's the one who designed epigenetics? He's not surprised by epigenetics. At the end of the day, Jesus is sufficient, right? No matter if you're worried about your genome or you're worried about Satan bringing darkness into your family line and protecting your kids from it, it is okay because the work of Jesus is there and accessible and sufficient for everything that you need, breaking every chain, as the song goes. And so you can look to that and trust in that and pursue that, whether cause or effect or God doing it, right? Okay, that is from Bragg. I have pause for station identification. I don't know what those words mean. Brent, help me.
Elle, I am just unbelievably impressed at your masterful
Oh dear.
control of the time. It is exactly at the top of the hour as we come to this point.
LaCroix break.
Yes, indeed.
Supreme.
Yes, this is the time where we stop. The station identification thing is a joke that I made for Marty. So okay. I say, who knows how many people listening to this live Q&A have actually spent time listening to the radio, but they used to do this thing like in the middle of broadcast and like pause for station identification, and I put 95.1 WICM Albany. So there's a lot of nerdery going on there, but that is an allusion to the fact that our ministry, Impact Campus Ministry, started in 1995 in Albany, New York. So Impact has quite a history at this point, and we are here doing our thing, and we want to stop and thank everyone who supports us in this work. We have a mission to college students. That part of our BEMA has become this kind of weird thing where we're a little bit outside of that. Zach Dean is actually in the chat, by the way. He says hello to you, Al. Zach Dean on the 2016 Israel and Turkey trip with us. Also a former campus minister for us in Albany. He's actually now one of our board members. But yeah, BEMA's kind of this weird thing, and we're kind of like outside of the campus ministry part of the organization in some ways, but we're also like, we're still part of this organization, and we have Josh Basse. He's one of our other hosts on the podcast. He is a specific campus minister to college students who are from BEMA. We have all kinds of ideas about how we can integrate our audience who are not college students with our audience who are college students. So a lot of that stuff is on the horizon. Marty has talked about that before. We'll talk about it again. But all of that is possible because of the people who are listening, who support our work. So thank you for that. We have all kinds of stuff going on. We have the reboot of Session 1 that we talked about at the beginning. We have ongoing episodes in Session 9. The current episodes being released are L's episodes. We're back in our Talmudic Matthew series, having a great time with that. We're recording 2 more of those episodes tomorrow and Tuesday. So ongoing work there. We have the Bema liturgy, which people have been using for the last few years. That first round of the liturgy was written by Marty and Reed. This second round that is currently in production is being written by Elle and Josh. So look for that. And then we're kind of going all over the place. Mostly we means Marty, but sometimes me. I was just in Kansas, in Wichita and Manhattan and a couple other places around there with Marty. We got to meet a whole bunch of people, literally hundreds of people, which was an incredible pleasure. Marty is leaving later this week for North Carolina. He's going to be there for 10 days. And then he has what we're calling the Wild Wild West tour, which, yes, that is a reference to the Will Smith song of 1999. Are you familiar with that movie, Al? You're not snickering as much as I would expect for.
I just noticed that I have new questions that you uploaded, so I was desperately Googling.
Only one. Okay, all right. Sorry. Continue with your Googling.
Someone out
But anyway,
there loved it though.
Wild Wild West tour. Marty's mostly going to be in Idaho and Washington, possibly Utah. I think for sure at least one detour into Oregon at some point, but that stuff is coming up on the near horizon. We're looking at Minneapolis, I think in the fall, maybe. So lots of stuff in the works. And again, all of this is possible because people are so generous and enable us to do this ministry. So that's that. To answer, yes, Zach, the Wild Wild West movie is that old. And oh man, I am not recommending it. I'll just say that. To answer your question, Elle, it is me running the Chiron. I'm a little one-man band behind the scenes here. Maybe a lighthearted question. Please take it lighthearted. Doreen wanted to know when you're going to be having your beginner Hebrew lessons again. Do you want to share anything in that regard or just shut it down?
Of course, I receive it as a huge blessing that people ask me this all the time. I'm so grateful that people care about the work that we're doing and the things I've been putting out in the world. And so thank you for your continued interest. At this point, no, Doreen, I'm so sorry. The fun thing to share is that one of the reasons, although I've kind of got a stack of projects, right? Bama liturgy is one. I've got other things going on, but one of them is so George and I are having another baby this summer. So won't be woohoo! Yay!
I did not have my party popper ready. I didn't know if you were going to share that or not.
That would have been great. Yep, this summer I am pregnant once again. And so it won't be this year if that does happen. So thank you for your interest. But yes, there's many people in my email who are sad. And so enjoy the community, the community of sad people. I'm sorry. I wish I could do absolutely everything.
Yeah, me too. People want to know where Marty's going to be in North Carolina. Of course, he already threw a link in there for the people on Facebook, but go to martysolomon.com/schedule if you want just Marty. Go to bamonadiscipleship.com/news if you want everybody's events. But we've got a little bit of Raleigh. We've got a little bit of Durham. We've got some Greensboro. I think that's it for North Carolina. As far as the Wild Wild West tour, Spokane, James was asking about Spokane. That is on the schedule. I just got a whole bunch of details this week for that tour that I will be putting up probably tomorrow. And then we have a Bema Messenger coming out. So if you want all of this stuff like pushed into your email inbox, you can sign up for the Bema Messenger. Lots of ways to stay connected to these things. But that's enough for now. Let's get back into the questions. Elle, go for it.
I'm ready. Here I am. Send me. Okay. You've put a question from Quint up first at the top from Facebook Live. They say, "Hello, Elle. If you have time, well, thanks for the consideration. What are your thoughts on Amy Jill Levine's works?" I'm familiar with that name, but the reason I missed Brent's 1995 film reference, I can only presume it was film, it may not have been film, was I was Googling, where do I know that name? How do I know this person? And the answer is that I don't really. I looked at her bibliography. I see that she's mostly published out of Sheffield Press. I do really like the work of the university. Excuse me. See, the La Croix came back. I knew it would come back for me. That's a pregnancy ailment. Okay. Bibliography out of Sheffield. I really appreciate much of the work that comes out of the Sheffield Press, but I'm not familiar with her work specifically. I see that she has some companions to different books of the Bible. I generally enjoy the companions commentaries put out by Athalia Brenner, is the editor of those. If I talk slower, I'll see what Brent is telling me. She has connections to the Bible Project. Well, I like the Bible Project, so there's that. So I cannot tell you here or there a more precise opinion. I apologize for that. But future joy, I'm sure, to do some rooting around investigation. Brent started a new line. Is this going to be him telling me something else? Does not appear to be. He's jumping down somewhere else. Okay, great. Thank you, Quint. Jessica has a couple of brief questions from season 8. Elle talks about how there was a belief that someone had to wait 22 years to see if a dream was true or not. Was there a similar belief about a statute of limitations for prophecies? Great question. Also, why was Joseph, never considered a magi, given that he practiced divination? Oh my. Why was dream interpretation so heavily emphasized in their family? Was that a common practice of many cultures back then? Or were Yaakov, Jacob, and Yosef, Jojo, uniquely gifted with those skills? What a fun bundle. Fun little bundle of questions. Jessica, thank you. So, magi specifically is a term in the Levant, across the Mediterranean, all the way over to modern Iran. And the term doesn't quite extend down to Egypt. I believe also is primarily a Greek term. And so we wouldn't have seen it back in Genesis. Would he have been considered a magi if he was working in the Persian court rather than the court that he was in with Pharaoh? Perhaps, but that's why he isn't labeled one in the book of Genesis. Was dream interpretation a thing for their family, or was it common? Great question. It is and it isn't. So it is common for priests. So you have these books that are fantastic to read, which I think I mentioned in that episode, which I know you've listened to because the question comes from there. But these books are pretty fun if you see them as light reading about, like, if you have a dream with an ostrich, it certainly means this. But if you have a dream with a crocodile, it certainly means this. And so it wouldn't be unheard of for somebody to do dream interpretation at all. It's common in that there is like a reference book that they could refer to. On the other hand, what's unique about what Jojo does is he gives the credit to God, right? Of course, Pharaoh is getting the same answers from the magicians in his court because they're using the same dream book, right? Or maybe somebody's going a little bit off script. We can't know for sure. But when Jojo shows up, he says, "Oh, my family knows God." He doesn't say my family, but I'm paraphrasing here. He says, "God does the dream interpretation, not me." And so that made him unique in the court of Pharaoh. It was common across different cultures, not just Egyptian culture, to do dream interpretation. It's a considered a regular way that the supernatural communicated with the natural. And we see that even through the New Testament, right? Read the book of Acts, people are always having dreams. Peter has dreams, right? One of the most important dreams of all dreams, the inclusion of the Gentiles dream with the food, right? So we have a lot to owe to dreams throughout our whole Bible. So that's that. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Jake asked, he recently started listening to the podcast, and Jake was thinking about how the Eastern versus Western mindset would have impacted the way the New Testament church would have seen leadership. We tend to see one person at one point with a team working under their authority. How would the Eastern mindset see leadership, specifically when it came to the church, differently? Whew. Well, what a fun question. It's also a great question that I don't have all the answers to. I always want to be careful, though I did live in Central Asia for some time, making and so my theories are educated. They are not the same as talking to someone who lives in Lebanon, right? So, and is from Lebanon, and etc. So, just disclaimer: these are my cobbled together thoughts to answer your question, Jake. So you do point out one person and then a team under their authority. Is that the same when it came to the church? How is it different? One thing that pops to mind to me is in the early rabbinic system, we had the Anaim and the Tanaim. So before there was a rabbi running around, it would always be pairs. So this is the pre-Jesus model. And one person, their whole job, which is pretty fun, it's a little bit like Brent, their whole job is to hold all of the scripture in their head at the same time. Am I saying that Brent has all the scripture in his head? It's possible. No one knows. But he does have all the episodes in his brain and pulls them up very quickly to say where they live. But there's a companion person who is the one who teaches. So they keep those separated, because if you're trying to it happens all the time, if you're trying to do a teaching and you're the only one who has the whole Tanakh memorized, and you can be like, well, in Ezekiel it says this, and nobody has a Bible app, you're in a hard place, right? And so you had one person who knew exactly what Ezekiel 19 says, and then the other person who makes teaching. So it was accountability built into the pod that went out and taught the people. So duality, rather than often in the Western American church, right? Often it's the one guy up on the stage, and then a bunch of peons, a bunch of peasants. I'm being facetious. But another way that we can think about differences between leadership in the Eastern Church versus Western Church is thinking about values. So Orthodox Christianity is a really big value put on mystery, and they have a different value system when thinking about that mystery, versus Western side is like the truth is something that we are going to pursue, and we will be able to define it. And once we've defined it, we can put a little box around it. And everybody who is outside of the box, here and here and here, is no longer in. They are now out. Certainly that still happens. It's not that nobody ever gets communicated in the Eastern Orthodox Church. And yet that changes the way that leadership functions, right? If you just have one major player on stage and then a bunch of people who must believe exactly what that person believes, then it's going to look different than if you have a value on mystery and transcendence and esoteric meaning. Then you're going to share that stage a little bit differently. Final value, before getting a little bit more into nitty gritty, is we have a bunch of words for church leadership when we look through the epistles, and even if we go back into Tanakh. But I'm thinking of Timothy the Timothys and etc. We have different words and they mean different things for different roles in the church. But one of those is presbyteros, which just means older person, right? It's the same word that we have in Tanakh. It's symbolic of age. And so in especially the American church, we don't always, sometimes we do, right? There's lots of subcultures in America, but we don't always pick the oldest folks in the room to be the leaders. Often we choose the person with the biggest personality or who seems the most vigorous or the most charismatic in terms of the way that they speak, right? The best teachers, and they end up being at the helm. And the other conception of age, right? Because we tend to put those things in the category of like youth and middle age more than age. However, in biblical society, it was all about the Skenim, who are the elderly people. And we see that reflected in the early church as well. We know that didn't hold on forever because in an episode that I'm sure Brent will pull to the fore eventually, I talked about how we found different inscriptions of female elders in the early church. And I believe one of them was only like 21. And so, how strictly they held to that presbyteros idea and in what parts of the Mediterranean, right? Because there's different cultures across the Mediterranean is still up for debate. But here's the more nitty-gritty part that I do think is instructive. One last way that we can look at difference between East and West in terms of church hierarchy and church leadership is by examining what happened after the schism, the Great Schism, which sounds like a fake pretend fantasy movie thing, but it's not. It's a big schism that happened. The Church of the East split from the Church of the West. It wasn't called that, but the Roman Catholic Church, right before Catholic came to mean all the things that it means now, before it was just like the Church of everybody is over here. My camera is flipped, so I'm going the wrong way, but nevertheless, the Church of the East went all the way into China and Mongolia and India and way down across the globe. The great majority of early church that we sometimes forget about is not just the Mediterranean, it's the Church of the East. You can Wikipedia that. And that became, or components of it became, the Eastern Orthodox Church. It's not a direct translation one-to-one. Eastern Orthodox Church is different than that original thing, but it still preserved a bunch of the elements, the cultural elements, when we're thinking about East versus West. So in the Roman Catholic Church, that's what we're going to hold up for comparison because that's the schism that happened, the breaking off point. They had different ways of talking about the Trinity, which were very, very minute, very minute things, and then slightly different ways of talking about Mary and the liturgy around Mary. That's why they split. So you think Roman Catholic Church, one of the first things you think is Pope Francis. He just got out of the hospital. Hooray, hurrah. But that's a single supreme leader, right? He can get a download from God, and it is a centralized thing that can demand buy-in. Not everything the Pope says gets that label on it, right? But we talked about this relatively recently. Absolutely not in either case is print. He doesn't remember. The episodes are in a spreadsheet. That's fine. But at the beginning of this series of Talmudic Matthew, the very first episode that we did with Marty was about different authorities, right? And one of the authorities was the Pope can say something, and now it's doctrine. In the Eastern Orthodox Church, there is no single supreme leader. It's shared among the patriarchates. They are called autocephalous, which means self-governing. And they do have one central bro, but the central bro is called the wow, this is going well. The Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, which is pretty fun. So his position is, quote, first among equals rather than a supreme leader, a supreme authority. So very different, right? The Pope and Roman Catholic Church is like descended from Peter spiritually and is the head of the church. Eastern Orthodox, maybe reflecting that Eastern Western difference, does not have that. They have a leader, but he's first among equals. It's supposed to be more of a flat hierarchy. Their structure also reflects that. So they have a more decentralized structure. Their churches are more independent. They have their own archbishop and patriarchate without one leader, again, versus the church councils. There's a really vivid list in the Roman Catholic hierarchy. And so there's more unilateral authority in the Western side than in the Eastern side. Once again, I am not a person who is from the Eastern split at Constantinople, so I am speculating, of course. It's also helpful to remember that the writings from the early church that we have are often not quite along our expectation, right? If we're reading the book, again, presuming a Western lens, and then we read Timothy that way, we might miss things rather than remembering that the milieu is a mix at that time. So, just putting out there. Samantha. What does Samantha say? Samantha recently found out in the original text in Exodus 3:14 that it should read, I will be what I will be, rather than what she has learned, I am who I am. She tried to Google some explanations, try to gain some understanding of what this means, and she is more confused than when she started. Are there resources I can suggest to help with clarifications on this point? The bad news is I have no resources. The good news is that I do have something to say. So in Exodus, maybe that's also bad news. Who knows? But you're the one listening to this, so that's on you. In Exodus 3, it is God introducing himself to Moshe. Kind of. Moshe is asking him, hey, who should I say is sending me? Who are these people that you want me to free? And he tells him the Tetragrammaton, so God's name. And then he kind of translates it for him, Ihye, in this long thing. And the way that sometimes it is translated in all caps, which feels very significant in our Bible publishing apparatus, is I am who I am. And Samantha has run across the idea that it might be, I will be what I will be. Those feel different, don't they? So here is the trouble. Here's the trouble with Hebrew. This is why not learning Hebrew can be a cause for rejoicing. In Hebrew, time is a circle. So in the Hebrew language, there are different prefixes and different suffixes, and the prefixes tell you whether something is present, past, or future. But then sometimes if you put an and at the beginning, it reverses it. Oh no. So it says it's future, but it's actually past because it has this and, has the valve in front. What's happening? And a lot of the difficult work, well, some of the difficult work in Hebrew is trying to figure out which tense it is. Is this supposed to be present? Is this supposed to be future? Actually, present is usually pretty clear, but is this supposed to be past or is this supposed to be future? This is partially a reflection of their culture, where it's not where temporality is circular, right? You've got the stars, they're turning in the heavens, they're circling back around. The center of that first Genesis chiasm is times and seasons, right? And so with everything in a great circle moving around to present, future, past, kind of a big shrug emoji. Sometimes it feels that way, at least in the text. And so if you actually look at Exodus 3:14, which once again I shall do, so that I make sure that I am as clear as I can be and not gesticulating. Elohim el Moshe, Ihye asher Ihye. Yes, so technically, that is future. So I agree with wherever you ran across that it feels like it is I will be who I will be rather than I am who I am, because of that particular prefix, which sticks it in that particular category. However, again, because Hebrew is so malleable and plastic and sometimes upside down and confusing, um, it's also I've been who I have been. You can also take it I will be, or I am who I am, right? Either way, in the story with Moshe, right? Either way, God is still being frustrating. It's still being annoying and yet comforting to Moshe, in that Moshe saying, "Who are you? What's your name? What am I supposed to tell people?" And he's like, "I will be who I will be. You'll find out." There's a wink there that I wouldn't want to miss, but saying I am who I am isn't like that much more elucidating. It's still like annoying if you're Moshe. So at the end of the day, it doesn't make a huge difference interpretively. And so there you go. If someone out there really wants it to be I am who I am and not I will be who I will be, that's fine. It's not the end. It's not the end of the day. Brent will now break in for a follow up to the last question.
Yeah. Apparently, Marty is okay with calling me out in the chat for not checking my text messages. I think he could just put his follow up in the chat. That's fine. He wants you to know that we talked about whatever it was you were talking about before, which I wasn't listening to because, again, one man band, and I was doing something else. So, anyway, episode 257, the Wells and Husbands episode, there is some stuff in the show notes, quote. So I don't know what that means, but that pertains to the last question.
Yes. I was talking about how old were elders. And that's what that is.
Okay,
Yes.
there you go.
People look for that all the time. So I'm glad that telling people it's in the show notes is a good use of time.
Love it. Carry on then.
Carry on. John asks, also, but never mind. Yes, okay, I'm fine. Marty hanging out in the comments, though, is entertaining to me. Isn't this supposed to be your break? Aren't you supposed to be chilling and enjoying your Sunday when you're not working? It's fine that you're listening.
He's probably home from church now, and he's like, let's see what's going on. And
yeah,
he promised that he wouldn't antagonize us in the Q&A document, but apparently that didn't extend to the chat.
That did not hold. That did not. Well, yeah, I'm fine with antagonization. I just hope that he gets rest. That's all. It's just friendship. Okay, what does John ask? I'm happy you're here, Marty, in many ways. On the planet, in the chat, all of this is good to me. Just, you don't have to be. I'm sure you know that. John asks, do you have any comments on the translation of chesed as mercy? John thinks it's incorrect, especially considering the context. From BLB's outline of usages, it seems like faithfulness would be a better context for what God is wanting in Hosea. Well, great, John. Chesed, I have a particular etymology for, which not everybody will share with me, and that's fine. But it is in my Q&A document, which means I get to tell you my opinion. So there is a word that's usually translated mercy, and it's not chesed. The word usually translated mercy is racham. Now, I don't think that's the correct answer either. I don't think that should be translated that way, but I've talked about that in the Isaiah series on maternal images for God. So you can go find that if you would like. But for chesed, I wouldn't go with faithfulness either. Faithfulness, I would stick on emunah, which comes up all the time. We talk about emunah all the time. Brent says maternal images is episode 376. Thank you, Brent Billings. Chesed, based on the image behind it, I would translate as compassion, because here's the image. The image is of a parent who is bending down think it's exposing the back of their neck specifically, to hear what it is that their child is saying to them. And so whenever I run into chesed, I translate it compassion, compassion. Because to me, more than steadfast love, I've heard like covenant love, I've heard faithful love, I've heard all sorts of things. Abounding love, maybe that's one of them. For me, it's compassion, because if you're like bending your ear down to your kid and being like, I know you're going to ask for a coloring page for the 50th time, but I will still give you the moment that you're asking for. I would go with compassion. I would have to know exactly which use in Hosea you're talking about so that I could put that in situ. But it's okay that you didn't. That's all right. You can look it up, John. Charity has a question about Psalm 51, verse 10. Oh, dear. In the Hebrew, the word ruah is in that verse 3 times, translated as word and spirit. I'm sorry, I misquoted what she said. As the word and the word a, and then the word spirit. There we go. She felt led to reach out and ask why. So that would be confusing, Charity, if it did show up that way. The good news is it doesn't. What you are running into is a problem with your interlinear. You're probably looking at a reverse interlinear or maybe a forward interlinear. I forget which one. But if you're on BLB, as so often we are, there's these different tabs along the top, and one says like forward, FWD, and one says reverse, and you can toggle between those. And what's happening is in Hebrew, like we talked about in the time thing, and gets squished on to that root, the ruah root. And a, the indefinite article, doesn't actually appear in Hebrew. And so if you're looking English straight on, it'll tell you and, ruah, a, ruah, and then, it's spirit, so it's ruach. It'll appear on all of those lines, and it doesn't. And if you look over at the Hebrew itself, verse 10 is the create in me a clean heart, and put a right spirit within me thing. It says, Bara li Elohim v'ruach nachon. So it's just once. It's just once. But common problem is getting confused with interlinears, so I am happy to bring it up. Great. Okay, Tanya says, my friend and I are hung up a bit on God's pricing of people in Leviticus 27, verses 1 through 7. Specifically, why is a woman's or female's value in general half of that of a male? I think I remember something about that, but I'm not finding it on the podcast, and it's hitting a very rough spot in the moment in our reconstruction. Any direction for a long or short explanation? Because I'm confident we are all equally precious to our Creator. Well, Tanya, that's a good instinct, and I agree with you. I think that we are equally precious to our Creator. Leviticus 27, verses 1 through 7 does indeed give an in-depth look at all the different types of servants and what you should specifically value them at. And if you're looking in English translation, right, it's going to specifically say your valuation shall be for a male this much and a female for this much. 20, if you're wondering. 20 shekels for a man, 10 shekels for a woman. So, oh no, God approves of the wage gap. That's not the takeaway. Don't take that as a takeaway. I am saying that in order to cut around under it, do a little flip it in reverse. Well, how am I possibly going to carry that off? You could speculate, of course, that it has to do with what the male servant is doing and what the female servant is doing. I'm not going to get into any of that at all. I am going to get into Exodus chapter 21, taking us back a little bit in the story, because I would argue that the differentiation between price valuation doesn't have to do with tasks or what they're doing or how essential that person is to God, who's precious and who's not, who is worth something and who's not, but rather time. It's a question of time. What do you mean, Elle? How could that be? Well, if you look at Exodus 21, you will find different rules around marriage of servants. So if you read Exodus 21, you will see that a female servant who gets married becomes a daughter, right? And if we go back to thinking about the patriarchality of biblical culture, that when you get married, you go to live in the insula of the patriarch, right? And so if you are marrying someone within that household, boom, you're already home, but you're a daughter now and you're not a servant. And if you get married to someone outside of that household, boop, 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 you're going to go and be with them and you're not there anymore. So you have a possibility, perhaps even a probability of leaving at an earlier tenure because you're going to become a daughter and not a servant. And who knows when that happens? Maybe that happens in the first year that you're there. Maybe it's the third year. Maybe it's the 10th year. We can't be sure, but there's a probability that you're leaving. And you almost definitely are unmarried if you're a servant, because otherwise you're being provided for in the house of the patriarch by your husband, by the ancestor in that family. There's no reason for you to get sold off. So it's if the family has encountered financial struggle and they're trying to keep their land and they lend out someone in their household to someone else to go be their servant in order to be able to keep their land. That's usually the situation. And again, if you're married, you're not in your family household anymore, so you can't be sold by your dad. Okay, what about a male servant? If you read Exodus 21, a male servant who gets married brings the family into servitude with him. And in fact, if he has kids, they're also servants. Big bummer. But so a man gets priced more highly because you're really not just buying him, you're also buying his potential children and then potentially his wife as well. And he doesn't have the easy out that women do until Shabbat year and Jubilee. Right? There's other situations he can get bought back by a kinsman redeemer, right? So that's not just the end of the road for him. There's lots of escape hatches that God built into the system. And yet I would explain that as the difference between pricing, not to do with the kind of work or how difficult the work is or that men are more valuable than women, but that if you're buying a female servant, she might be done at any point in time. You're not allowed to tell her she can't get married, and she might waltz out and go join another household as a daughter, as a part of that household, versus you keep the man and his family and any children they have until the time that their family buys them back through redemption or the freeing at the Shabbat or Shabbaton. So there you go. That is the last question that has been loaded before me, unless somebody's about to start typing in my document.
No typing, Elle. That is the end.
Wow, incredible. 20 minutes ahead of schedule.
Well, or 10 minutes behind schedule, depending on how you're looking at it.
Marty says
Were you targeting 2 hours?
I don't know. I mean, that's what I have in my calendar.
Okay, yeah. See, that's the thing. Yeah, calendars trip people up. This happens to me all the time. I put an event on the calendar. It defaults to 1 hour. It's actually a 2-hour thing. Maggie's like, "What's going on? I thought you were going to be done." It's like, "No, that was just the default. I forgot to change it." So anyway, that is it. But we had one other question pertaining to you specifically. Have you recovered from your concussion yet?
Well, thank you for your curiosity and your care. I know there are people out there who pray for me, and I'm very thankful for you. It is a day by day, up and down, trying to be able to read specifically is the problem. Read's always the problem. It's a joke. But he's not. He's great. Yes, being able to read is the big thing. So I was just up in Spokane 2 days ago, trying to get more help from a very fabulous specialist. So we'll see. Each day is different. Thank you for asking. I wish that it was magically better. Somebody who believes in, practices lots of snapping off of generational things. You can get on that on my behalf. I'd love that. No,
Also, Maggie is in the chat and she has affirmed that this calendrical problem happens to me often. So there you go.
calendrical.
Calendar problem, calendar time frame, whatever.
Yeah, wrong.
What I was talking about a moment ago.
Okay.
So then Doreen wanted to know if the next Q&A is Marty just gonna roast Reed in the comments, and the next Q&A is actually Marty. So April 28th, Monday, April 28th is a Marty Q&A, and I would invite Elle and Reed and Josh to come roast Marty in the comments, because surely at this point he has obligated himself to be back to roast everyone in the comments as we go. So I say share the love.
I'll take that into consideration.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And then we just had lots of comments come in after the mid break, congratulating you for the baby situation. Babies are the best. 3 is a holy number. So we've got all kinds of wonderful things. So that does it for this Q&A, Elle. Thank you for joining us. Marty, I double dog dare you to break your Sabbath rest. How are we reading that? It's a Monday Q&A. Shouldn't be a Sabbath for anyone. I think we could all be
Yeah,
there.
Sundays aren't Sabbaths anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, we're in. I guess we're scheduled for it. We'll put 2 full hours on the calendar just in case.
As long as I haven't taught on like honoring one another right before.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. We'll have to make some consideration there. All right. Thanks, Elle. Talk to you all later.
Great. Thank you. Bye.